The South African Railways had an office in London, and the timetable was a mine of information. It gave distances in kilometres, altitude, passport requirement information for South Africa, Botswana, Rhodesia, Malawi, and Mozambique. I had elected to go to Mozambique with the three others and went to the Portuguese consulate in Frankfurt and got a visa, which was required. Now, this is this day train from Pretoria to Witbank. This is an American-built Class 15 CA. These were very attractive engines and very loud. The exhaust was very exhilarating. After here, we hopped in our car and went in the direction of Waterval Boven, which is further east, where there was a huge marshalling yard. In these times, all freight over 50 kilometers had to be transported by train. It was government law, and that's why the railways had so much traffic in those days. The South African Railways was formed in 1910 from an amalgamation of the Cape Government Railways and the Tau Government Railways and a number of other smaller organisations. This is shunting at Waterval Boven Yard with a 14R class. These were British built, 1914 to 17. This is a post-war German S2 class 080. There were 100 of these. They were purely used for shunting, built by Krupp in 1952. We then headed down southbound and spent the night in Carolina, 69 kilometers south of Waterval Boven. This is the 335 Waterval Boven to Rayton train, hauled by a Garratt class locomotive, GMA, running backwards at dawn. After this, we drove into Swaziland. The distance from Carolina to Swaziland wasn't all that far. The railways in Swaziland were operated by the Mozambique Railways. This line in Swaziland existed purely to move iron ore from mines at a place called Kadaki near this locomotive depot. The locomotive depot was called Sidvokodvo, and here are two of our number, together with two lads from local. The engine is doing a shunt in the yards at Sidvokodvo. The first locomotive is a former Rhodesian Railways Class 12, and the second locomotive, I believe, is a Canadian post-war machine. This is on the outskirts of the marshalling yard. They were very cooperative here. They told us when trains would be running. This is a Canadian 482 built in the 1950s. I had a book called From Steam from Cape Town to Cairo by Ted Talbot, so it was a good guide of what locomotives this Mozambique Railways had. Again, one of the Rhodesian 12th class. At this time, Mozambique was a Portuguese colony, and it was a very colonial place to go to. What I remember about the hotel in Lourenco Marques was that we were required to wear jackets and tie for dinner. Now, this is in Mozambique itself. This is the junction station of Machava, 10 kilometers from the port city of Lourenco Marques, which is now called Maputo. This is a Baldwin built Pacific, built in 1914, and there were about half a dozen of these. I found them very attractive locomotives. Machava was the junction for three lines. There was a line to Rhodesia, there was a local line, and there was the line to Swaziland. Now, this is a 14th class former Rhodesian Railways 262, 262 Garratt. I think this is the only locomotive they had. According to That book which I just referred to, this was allocated to Beira in the middle of Mozambique, but it seems to have been shunted down. I'm sure locomotive movements came by sea because the journey by rail was naturally enormous. We weren't quite sure what the lay of the land was with regard to photography. We had this car with a South African registration number, and we just hung around at Machava station for a while, and then pulled our cameras out, and nobody bat an eyelid. So we were very fortunate. We managed to get into the depot at Lourenco Marques the following day with absolutely no problem at all. The main locomotive crews were Portuguese nationals. And I'd been to Portugal in 1970 and 71, and was to go again in 73 and 74. And the Portuguese loco crews were very, very, very pleasant. CFM stands for Caile Ferrovia Mozambique, or Caminos. I believe it's Caminos is the Portuguese word. The locomotives were a source of hot water for the locals, for the Africans. Whenever a stationary locomotive was hanging around, they always went with their pots and pans and got hot water for washing. And this was a common practice in a lot of countries. I experienced this in Spain and Portugal as well. Now, this is in the docks of Lourenco Marques. This is a tank engine of American parentage, doing a shunt, and the locals, as you can see, sitting on the buffer beam, getting a free ride home. There did not seem to be the apartheid in Mozambique like there was in South Africa. The gauge on all of South Africa railways is 3'6", that's 1,067 millimeters. But I gather there is now a standard gauge line from the coal fields of the Transvaal to the Indian Ocean at St. Richard's Bay. Now, this is on the grade uphill from Lourenco Marques to Machava, a passenger train with a Henschel Pacific. There were 3 of these built in 1955. Lovely chime whistle they had. And we chased this train for 30 odd kilometers. Seeing a black mamba snake crossing our path. When I went to Mozambique the following year in 1973, I took this train with my traveling companion. And we had a third man, and he picked us up at this station to take us back home. Now, this is the junction station of Moamba. Moamba is on the line to Rhodesia, and it's a junction station here. And this is an American built around the period of the First World War, heading a freight towards Lourenco Marques. I'm sure this cine footage of Mozambique Railway steam traction is more or less unique, because I haven't found any more in the internet from this era. This is again on the uphill from the city of Lourenco Marques to the junction at Machava. There was a shanty village right here, and a bridge over the railway, a road bridge. So it was a very good vantage point. These films were originally made by Kodak, Kodachrome 2 film. A 4-minute roll of film brought 50 feet. And when I had 50 feet reels, I joined them up by splicing them into a 400-foot reel. And up until the end of the 90s, I had a cine projector. I then met a gentleman who transferred all of this onto VHS tape. And my tape player is still in good condition. I decided to pass it over to John Machava. I rather fancy this is this same 14th class Garratt locomotive which we saw earlier in the film. Here we are in the locomotive depot area in Lourenco Marques. This is one of these 301 to 305 class Baldwin Pacifics again. This is back at Machava. This is just a local train going somewhere that I don't really know. The locomotive is one of the Canadian-built Montreal 210-2s built in 1955. And the last scene in Mozambique is just outside Machava on the line to Swaziland. This is a train of empty iron ore wagons hauled by 2 Canadian 210-2s of 1954 to 56 vintage. There were diesel locomotives at operation here as well. There was a train between Lourenco Marques and Johannesburg, hauled by one of these diesel locomotives, which I was to take with my friend in 1973. We left here in the mid-afternoon time and drove through Swaziland to Golela in South Africa. This is the border station between South Africa and Swaziland. It's on the Indian Ocean east coast from Durban. The distance from Durban to Golela is 388 kilometers. The line now goes through to Swaziland and eventually Mozambique, but at this point of time, it's a terminus. And we spent the night here. Accommodation in South Africa was always easy to find. It was, for our purposes, quite inexpensive. It was about 1.5 rand to the pound, and dinner, bed and breakfast was about five rand. This is the 19D class. The 19Ds were 482s. They were very numerous. 337 were built, and there were some differences in power and wheel size. This is further south from Golela in a rather tropical scenery, travelling southwards through past the nearest town to this would have been Mtubatuba. This is a GMA Garratt. There were lots of these. They were built by Bayer Peacock and Henschel in the 1950s. A couple are preserved. And much of the traffic around here is pit props. This is a train in the other direction coming from Durban. And our next port of call is Empangeni, and Empangeni is about halfway from Durban to Golela, 178 kilometers from Durban, 220 from Golela. And Empangeni is a center of the sugarcane industry. And there were a number of branch lines operating seasonal sugarcane trains, 3 lines into the interior. And we saw 3 trains here in a very short space of time, hauled by different types of garrets. This is one of the GMAs, the newest type they had. But there were some older garrets as well, which didn't see much service after this. It was normal in South Africa for garret locomotives to carry a water tank with them, because the only place where there was water storage was in the tank at the front. Now this is one of the older GE class garrets, 262 garrets. Locomotives in South Africa, Rhodesia and Mozambique were all coal-fired because there was vast supplies of coal. Another type of garret, a GEA. These look like sugarcane wagons being towed empty for filling up. Now, we then drove from Empangeni to Kranskop, and then from Kranskop to Greytown, and Greytown was at the exterior of the Pietermaritzburg system. There was Pietermaritzburg was a locomotive depot in Natal on the main line from Durban to Johannesburg, with an entirely Garratt allocation. And the line from Pietermaritzburg to in an easterly direction went to Greytown. And this is a very British atmosphere here. South Africa is two-language country, Afrikaans and English, but Greytown was very colonial British. The scenery, though, was rather mixed. We took film of whatever came along. The quality of the scenery is not all that special. But it becomes very special towards the end. Nearer the Pietermaritzburg end of the line, the grades are quite steep. It's 1 in 40 or 1 in 30. And there was a tendency for most trains on that section to be double-headed. Even though in this case, it's only a short train of 4 or 5 wagons, with a passenger car at the end. So this was a mixed train. There were no scheduled passenger trains on this line. And most of the white people, the Europeans, as they were called, had their own cars anyway. The trains were only used by Bantu passengers. This is one of the GF class, which I found were very British looking with their British type chimneys, but they were in fact built in Germany by Hanomag and Krauss Maffei in 1928. And there were 62 of them. Gradient pose, 1 in 30, 1 in 40. Now this is the star position. That's the city of Pietermaritzburg in the background. This location is called City View, and it's a horseshoe curve of almost 360 degrees. And in the afternoon, there tended to be a train every hour, slogging up this 1 in 30 grade with 2 garrets, each with its own water carrier.